Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. We're live from Israel with your top headlines from across the region. It's currently 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. I'm Devo Klein, and these are the latest developments coming to you live from Israel. The body of slain hostage Dror Or has now been identified by the IDF. Hamas delivered the body of the 48-year-old hostage late last night, and this morning the IDF confirmed his identification at the Abu Kabir Forensic Institute. This leaves behind one Israeli and one foreign national alone, still in the hands of Hamas. Slain hostage Ran Gvili and Thai national Sutisa Grintalak. Now, Or was murdered on October 7th, and his body was taken from Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the hardest hit communities on that dark morning. Dror's wife Yonat was murdered in their home, while he and his two children, 13-year-old Alma and 17-year-old Noam, were taken alive. Noam and Alma were released in the November 2023 hostage deal, returning home as orphans after the IDF confirmed their father's death on October 7th in May of 2024. Dror was a chef and a cheesemaker at the Be'eri Dairy. He loved traveling, basketball, and yoga. He was a kind and calm person and a deeply grounded man, his family says. But that was 2 years ago. Today, his family awaits his burial as Dror can finally be laid to rest in Israel. And behind the scenes, Egyptian state media is reporting that Egyptian and Turkish intelligence chiefs met yesterday with the Qatari prime minister to address overcoming obstacles and limiting violations to ensure that the fragile ceasefire can hold. The Cairo meeting between the mediators, bar the United States of course, focused on maintaining the ceasefire and discussing ways to continue to phase 2, this according to Egyptian sources. But on the ground in Gaza, a different story is unfolding. Last night, Nahal Brigade troops eliminated 5 terrorists in eastern Rafah who, according to the IDF, emerged from a tunnel in an IDF-controlled area in southern Gaza. And this morning, a similar incident occurred. 6 terrorists were identified emerging from tunnels in eastern Rafah, the same area. They were struck by the Air Force as they attempted to flee. Dozens of terrorists are still believed to be trapped in these underground tunnels in Rafah. The gunmen are emerging armed and posing an immediate threat to troops in blatant violation of the current ceasefire. And joining me now to discuss the fragile ceasefire and the recent developments coming out of the Gaza Strip are Professor Kobi of the INSS and Misgav Institute and Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you both for joining.
Pleasure.
So, as I reported, the clock is really ticking. It's running out for these terrorists who are trapped in these underground tunnels. They're running out of air, of water, of general supplies, and perhaps even patience. So, I'd like to get your opinions. What do you make of this strategy at this point in the war for the IDF? Supposedly just waiting for terrorists to emerge and eliminating them. Jonathan, if I can start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think there are a few hundred that are in these tunnels outside of the so-called yellow zone, the area that's controlled by Hamas. There was a time, it looked like, where the Turks in particular were trying to negotiate on their behalf. In fact, I think at one point they were trying to hold off on the return of at least one slain hostage, the return of one body, in exchange for the release of these terrorists from within the tunnels. That obviously didn't happen. And so now I think what we're watching is just a slow process of these people coming out and showing themselves. And in many cases, they're meeting a pretty harsh end. But this is the risk that they took when they signed up for service within Hamas. Not a surprise that the Israelis would be taking this approach. I do think that there could be some negotiations over these individuals. If what we're trying to do is to get to phase 2 of this deal. In other words, Hamas is still trying to secure their release in some shape or form. It is an interest that they have identified. So the question really is whether the Israelis want to try to leverage that for implementation of the next phase.
Absolutely. And Kobi, if I could also get your opinions on that as well.
Yes, at the beginning, Hamas tried to leverage the situation and to condition the release of the hostages in the releasing of their militants in the tunnels. They didn't succeed in doing that, and I hope that Israel will remain determined and very strict in this regard, and will not enable the Turks or even the Egyptians or any others to interfere here or to pressure the Americans in order to pressure Israel. It looks that the American administration and Israel are on the same page in this regard for the time being. And these terrorists have two options and two only. The first one is to surrender, and the second one is to be killed. And we have to remember that these tunnels are in the area which is controlled by the IDF, not in the area which is controlled by Hamas. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a problem. And therefore, under the current agreement and accepting the principle of the Israeli control there, I don't think that they have any other option. And I do believe that Israel will not withdraw from its position with regard to these militants.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that these Hamas terrorists had two choices. They can either surrender or be eliminated. And I get this feeling like in the beginning, in the first stages of the war, there were actually plenty of videos. The IDF would release videos of Hamas terrorists surrendering in masses as well. And we're not really seeing much of that anymore at this point. But at the same time, on the other hand, the disarmament of Hamas is a very important clause of the current ceasefire agreement. And the terror group has stated time and again that they will refuse to disarm. So is surrendering at all, do you think, on their radar? Is that an option for them? Kobi, if you can start us off and continue with your thought.
I think that in each day that passes, the probability is higher because they understand that nobody is there in order to back them or in order to help them. I'm not sure about the quality of the connection that they have with their commanders. And therefore, I assume that if they don't have a good connection, then they have to make the calls by themselves. And as it looks now, they will reach to the conclusion that it will be better for them to surrender. But in the very same time, we have to remember that we are talking about Hamas. These are very determined militants, very ideological, very radical, and they might decide differently. And with regard to the disarmament of Hamas, it doesn't look that Hamas intends to cooperate. It doesn't look that Turkey and Qatar pressure Hamas to cooperate. And I believe that Israel has to give the Americans the space and the time to do things in their way until they will reach to the sober conclusion that Hamas is not a partner, but on the contrary, Hamas is an obstacle. And the only way to dismantle Hamas, if somebody still wishes to realize the plan, is to resume the military fighting. And the only entity in the entire globe from edge to edge that is willing to do that and capable to do that is the IDF. Nobody else is going to do that.
I tend to agree with you on that. Jonathan, do you share the same sentiment as Kobi when it comes, well, both to the disarmament of Hamas and also to their surrender? Do you think that strategically it's something that makes sense for Hamas?
Look, I think there's a couple things at play here right now. Number one is, this is a terrorist organization that's been around since 1988. They have a long history of what they call resistance against Israel. I think most people would call it terrorism. But this has been their mission. And the idea that they would just hand over their weapons and surrender is, I think it cuts against everything that this organization stands for. So I don't see Hamas willingly entering into this surrender, handing over their weapons, and just leaving the Gaza Strip. They're going to need to be forced. And here I think it's important to understand, number one, the UN last week made it international law that Hamas be dismantled. That UN Security Council resolution that was passed by a vote of 13-0 with only 2 abstentions signifies that the world wants Hamas to dismantle itself. The key to that, though, is, as Kobi mentioned, this is Qatar and Turkey. These are the 2 countries that came to the table and approached Donald Trump. The Qataris in particular, after the Israelis struck that Hamas base in Doha, they came asking for a security guarantee from the United States. Donald Trump said to the Qataris, we can do that, but you've got to hand over Hamas on a silver platter. They were able to do at least part of what they had set out to do, and that was the return of the hostages. Obviously, we have two left right now, two slain hostages that need to be returned to Israel. But then comes phase two of this deal. And I do think that the Qataris are still key to this, the Turks perhaps to a lesser extent. But these are the two primary patrons outside of Iran that stood behind Hamas at every step of the way throughout these 2 years of war. This is where the United States needs to be putting the pressure right now. It's got to be on Doha and it's got to be on Ankara. We need to be coming down on them like a ton of bricks here in Washington. That should be the goal if the goal is to get to phase two of the deal.
Absolutely, I agree with that. But I guess when it does come to Turkey and, Turkish forces being here, that's something that the Israeli government has, said that they would not accept, and rightfully so, by the way, in my opinion. They will not accept Turkish forces here on the ground in Gaza. Jonathan, do you think that that's something that the Israeli government will have to eventually compromise on if we were going to have any sort of implementation for this phase two? I mean, it's from where we're sitting, it's really hard to see, the disarmament of Hamas. It doesn't seem like, as Kobi said, that there's any option other than the IDF or maybe even perhaps Turkish forces. So what do you make of all of that?
Yeah, Turkish forces are a non-starter from my perspective. I think the Israelis will never agree to that. This is like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Right. Turkey is the largest Hamas headquarters outside of the Gaza Strip. Istanbul is the financial hub for Hamas. Top operational leaders are based there. Top political leaders, economic generators for Hamas, they're all based there. There's no way that the Israelis allow for the Turks to get a foothold inside of Gaza. There's no way that they allow the Qataris to do this. If there's ever going to be an international force that presides over the Gaza Strip, no one actually wants to get in their right mind until Hamas is disarmed. So what we're looking for right now are the pragmatic Arab states, the Saudis, the Emiratis, maybe a few others. If we want them on the ground, Hamas needs to surrender first. You don't put Turks in and then ultimately watch them help resuscitate Hamas. The thing that I'm watching, though, right now that I'm more concerned about is that the Turks right now are putting assets on the ground in Syria. And so while everyone's eyes have been drawn to the Gaza theater, it does look like Turkey is slowly and methodically building up intelligence and military assets under the new al-Shara regime in Syria. I'm worried about a potential confrontation there while everybody else stays focused on Gaza, which at this point is really just a tactical theater, not a strategic one from Israel's perspective.
Absolutely. And we also can't forget, of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran, who are also trying to rearm their proxies in the region. And so, Kobi, I want to ask you, just based off of your take that you said earlier, that you think that, for the disarmament of Hamas to actually happen, the IDF needs to take a crucial role and a significant part. But we have other fronts developing as well. It's not just the Gaza Strip. So do you still hold that opinion when it comes to all of these other developing fronts? I mean, we can't forget Hezbollah, who we are still striking because they also keep violating their ceasefire. We're having anti-terror operations in Judea and Samaria, which is also a very active front. I mean, strategically, where should Israel and where should the IDF be pouring all of their resources into at this point in time?
Strategically, we have to remember that since the first day of the war, the murderous attack of October 7th, the war was not limited or contained geographically to the Gaza Strip or was in a bilateral level between Israel and Hamas. From the first beginning, it was a regional multi-front war. And this is the reason that all the fronts are interrelated. There is a mutual influence between the fronts. And therefore, if Israel will not be able to finish the job in the Gaza Strip, it will impact directly and negatively all the other fronts, mainly when it comes to Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Shiite militias in West Iraq, and the Iranian themselves. It will be like a very strong blow of wind in the sails of the entire resistance axis, which is led by Iran. And if Israel will not be able to finalize things in the Gaza Strip, it will be a very problematic signal for Israel when it comes to Hezbollah, because this will encourage Hezbollah to continue reconstituting themselves, and it will encourage the Iranian to continue supporting these efforts. And therefore, I think that Israel has, and I think that Israel already understands that from the strategic point of view, all of these fronts are interrelated, and Israel cannot afford itself to finish the war in the Gaza Strip without dismantling Hamas, disarming Hamas, and demilitarizing the Gaza Strip. Without these two conditions, there will be no realization of the glorious plan of President Trump, which is backed, by the way, by the international community with the Security Council Resolution 2803. Everything now is deeply dependent on the American call, on the American decision. As long as the Americans will continue believing that they are able to convince Hamas by using the Turkish and the Qatarian leverage over Hamas, they will continue restraining Israel from operating against Hamas freely and intensively. And this is, I would say, a very bad scenario for Israel and for the Gaza Strip as well, if it will last a long period of time. I hope that the Americans will reach to the conclusion that, as I said before, Hamas is not a partner in this regard, and Hamas is not going to cooperate with the plan. And they will go for a gradual realization of the plan, which means that in the eastern part, which is controlled by the IDF, they will begin with the technocrats government supported by the ISF and guided by the peace board. And in the western part, the IDF will accomplishing the mission until dismantling Hamas, demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, and then the mechanism that was already established and began operating in the eastern part will be able to extend its authorities to the entire Gaza Strip.
Wow, sounds like we have quite a long way to go, if I do say so myself. But I'd like to perhaps just zoom in and I guess just dissect these, micro eras, if we can even call them that, because we still have two more bodies of slain hostages in Gaza. As I mentioned in my report earlier, after Dror Or has been identified, two remain. Should Hamas cooperate and transfer, not locate the bodies, because I believe at least that they know exactly where they are, but when the transfer occurs, Kobi, do you expect the ceasefire to progress in perhaps a different way? Could we maybe be seeing a change in the IDF strategy if Hamas is sort of run out of these, so-called bargaining chips, which is, it's very painful to say, but it perhaps could be welcoming a different phase once they do transfer all of the hostages. I mean, what do you think?
First of all, we have to understand the organizing rationale of Hamas strategy. And the organized rationale, according to my understanding, is to waste time in order to earn time. The idea is to prolong the process as much as possible in order, and this is the idea of wasting time, in order to earn time, to earn this wasted time for reconstituting themselves governmentally and militarily. And they are doing pretty well in this regard, unfortunately. At the end of the day, when they will release the other two hostages, I believe that we will find ourselves in a sort of, I would say, a sort of a stalemate, okay? Because the stage two of the plan is totally dependent, or the essence of stage two is the idea of the disarmament of Hamas and the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. As we see till today, there is no even a single country that is willing to contribute its troops to the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, as long as Hamas is still the effective sovereign power in the western part of the Gaza Strip. Nobody is going to fight Hamas, and nobody is going to risk its troops and personnel when they know that Hamas is still on its feet. And therefore, I think that we are going to face a stalemate. I hope that it will not be for a long period of time. But as I said before, everything is dependent and only dependent only on the American position in this regard. And as long as the Americans will continue believing that they are able to convince Hamas, or even if they do not believe, but they prefer to keep the situation as a prolonging ceasefire because they removed an obstacle in front of the realization of the grand vision of President Trump when it comes to the region, to the regional architecture, and therefore they will restrain Israel, then the stalemate will be even a heartening stalemate.
Interesting. And Jonathan, I'd love to get your take on that as well, on also what Kobi just said about the international forces, but specifically on what he mentioned, where it seems a little bit like a chicken and egg situation. If the international stabilization forces won't risk their troops to come in until Hamas is disarmed, but we need them to disarm Hamas, otherwise Israel has to do it, then that does put us in a stalemate. Do you agree with that assessment?
Look, I do to a large extent. What I would say is that Israel has a couple of choices. As I see it right now, the hostage crisis is effectively over. I mean, there's one Israeli body that's being held. They can get it back or not. I think that all depends on Hamas. But as far as, you don't see the hostage family forum coming out every day. Hostage Square is not what it was. The political meaning of all of this has shifted in Israel. There has been a sigh of relief because of the return of the vast majority of those bodies and all the live hostages. There is no more suffering that's taking place inside of Gaza, and that was a big part of the push on the part of the Israelis. So when you look at Gaza now, again, I mentioned before, it's a tactical problem from Israel's perspective, not really a strategic one any longer. Hamas is largely defeated militarily. It's not to say that there isn't more that could be done to dismantle the organization. We'd like to see them willingly turn in their weapons, which again, I think is not likely. So then that leaves Israel with a couple of choices. One, they can leave Gaza split into two. The yellow line dividing the two parts, 47% and 53%. So it's basically divided in half. And Hamas controls a portion of it. The Israelis have a larger buffer zone around the Gaza-controlled areas, which will prevent people from attacking the border and will give Israel more time to intercept rockets if they are fired. So it's not a bad status quo to have this yellow line remain. Now, I would argue that there are still some options here. Number one, Israel may say, you know what, this is not enough. We need to go in and finish the job. If that's the case, then you've got more hard fighting in the enclave that Hamas controls. It's a smaller, more densely packed area. But I will also just note that Hamas has lost a huge amount of its capabilities. The heavy weapons, the rockets, even a lot of its fighters are just no longer capable. And the tunnels, I mean, we get a sense that they're starting to get closed off. The exits in and out of the yellow zone may be fewer and fewer as the days goes on. The last thing that I would just note, though, is that if the Israelis have to ultimately make a choice and they don't want to deploy more fighters, more weapons, more assets, and to make the population exhausted as they have been, they've been called up for hundreds of days, many of these reservists, there may be a moment where Israel says, okay, well, we've done enough, and they withdraw from the rest of the Gaza Strip. I think that's less likely. I think holding that yellow line is probably where Israel ends up for a long time. You will see howls of disapproval coming from the international community. People are going to say that Israel is occupying half of Gaza. You know what? Until Hamas surrenders, Israel has no choice but to stay there. That's my final analysis. I think Israel has no choice but to stay where it is.
Yeah, I agree that if the idea for it to withdraw from this yellow line, that would actively be, harming Israel's security potentially in the future. We are really almost out of time, but Kobi, if I could just get your final last sentence just to wrap us up, do you agree with that?
I partially agree because the problem is if such a status quo will be established, we have to remember that Israel will not be able to prevent the entrance of humanitarian aid to the western part of the Gaza Strip. Under such circumstances, we might fight the Egyptians opening the Rafah crossing without any coordination with Israel, when Israel has no control over the Rafah crossing, and then most of the humanitarian aid will enter from Rafah crossing. And knowing Hamas and its motivation, we have to assume that Hamas will do its utmost efforts in order to reconstitute itself, first of all, militarily. And they have the capacities, they have the knowledge, although we damage them very severely, they have the potential to reconstitute themselves. And if this is going to be the status quo, where the Gaza Strip is divided between East and West by the yellow line, and we don't have an effective control over the entrance of the humanitarian aid, then we are in the path towards another violent clash that will be in 2 years, in 3 years, but we will find Hamas stronger than it's today.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we do have to end our panel, but I want to thank you both so much for joining us today, Jonathan Schanzer and Professor Kobi Michael. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having us.
And in some good news, a good friend of Israel, Argentine President Javier Milei, told Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar that Argentina will open its new embassy in Jerusalem come this spring. Now, the announcement came during a meeting where the two leaders discussed deepening bilateral ties and expanding economic cooperation. If completed, Argentina will become the 8th country to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, following Fiji, the United States, Guatemala, Honduras, Kosovo, Papua New Guinea, and Paraguay. Sa'ar thanked the Argentinian leader for his friendship and support throughout the war. Take a listen to Sa'ar's words.
The relationship between Israel and Argentina is not only special, it is extraordinary. Argentina had stood firmly by Israel through our darkest hours during the last 2 years. This will not be forgotten. Argentina has been and continues to be a trusted partner on the right side of history.
And in another positive update, researchers in Israel are now using artificial intelligence to unlock secrets from the world's largest collection of medieval Jewish documents. That's right, the Cairo Geniza, the biggest collection of medieval Jewish documents in the world, has been the object of countless hours of study by scholars for more than a century, but only a fraction of its over 400,000 documents have been thoroughly researched. Why? These documents come in various forms. They are either fragments of larger documents or have been distorted over time, making their research difficult and time-consuming for scholars. But now, with the incredible advancements of artificial intelligence, researchers can now access the whole collection much faster than traditional methods allow. AI is transcribing these texts and cross-referencing names or words across a vast database, allowing for this project to make significant gains. Have a listen to the professor.
We are constantly trying to improve the abilities of the machine to decipher ancient scripts. And you can imagine, I don't know whether you're able to read your grandfather's diaries. I'm not. But we can teach the machine by experts who know these scripts to transcribe different centuries, different scripts. I personally have trained the machine to transcribe lots of scripts in languages that I don't know. Obviously this makes written heritage much more widely accessible. And if you think of literature, it's one thing, but if you think of all the parish books or travel documents that are hidden in European or worldwide archives, where one then can reconstruct the way of a family traveled, how people immigrated to the US, and not only in English or Hebrew or languages that are close to this area, but also in Chinese or in Japanese or in Korean. The modern translation possibilities are incredibly advanced now, and interlacing all this becomes a much more feasible work now.
A wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. I am Devo Klein. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.